storm system near the Yucatan is all we're tracking midway through the month of August as the question gets asked yet again here on Tracking the Tropics. Will the tropics ever awaken? And if so, when are they expected to awaken? We're live in your hurricane headquarters to break down the very latest on what's going on out there on Tracking the Tropics, powered by Handyman Roofing. Hello there to you folks. JB here with you live in your hurricane headquarters. Got, of course, WFLA Chief Meteorologist Max Fendery, Chief Meteorologist Jeff Biradelli, Meteorologist Rebecca Berry, and joining us from WREG, our featured meteorologist today, joining us from Memphis, Tennessee, it's Wendy Nations. Great to have Wendy on the program. Looking forward to picking her brain. We're going to be answering your questions coming up in a meteorologist Q&A. You see the hashtags all around your screen. Hashtag Hey Wendy, hashtag Hey JB, hashtag Hey Rebecca. But we'll start here with hashtag Hey Jeff, with the very latest on the tropics.
So, JB, this time of year, by now, most of the meteorologists would have already moved into the building and into the weather center with our sleeping bags and our suitcases. And, the past couple of years has been really, really active. This year has completely been shut down. I mean, it's been asleep. And we like that, obviously. It's nice when it's quiet. But there are signs that things are about to wake up. And perhaps the first sign of that is this system that's entering the Caribbean, or really it's moving towards the Yucatan Peninsula right now. And as we kind of zoom out, there's not too much else out there. So let's concentrate on that system that's headed into the Yucatan right now. It actually has a decent amount of thunderstorm activity. And if it wasn't for the Yucatan being in the way, land being in the way, it probably would form before it got into the Western Gulf. But the National Hurricane Center is saying there's about a 30% chance now that this could potentially form into a tropical system over the next 5 days. So this would probably happen Saturday-ish before it makes landfall somewhere in Mexico there, or maybe very southern Texas around Brownsville. Could become a tropical depression, but we don't think it's going to be any worse than that. You can see the progression of it moving across the Yucatan right there, plenty of thunderstorms, and eventually possibly forming as it heads further west. All right, now we're in the extreme eastern part of the Atlantic Ocean, and there are some robust tropical waves, not just the one that's moving off Africa right now, but there are tropical waves behind it. So one thing that has happened is we have started to see signs of life across Africa. And it's not warm water that's inhibiting it, or lack of warm water. That's not the case. There's plenty of above normal water temperature. Anywhere you see the yellow and the orange and kind of reddish shades, that's water temperatures above the average. So it's certainly not lack of warm water or cool water that's causing the Atlantic to be shut down. So what is it? Well, it's interesting. For the past couple of weeks, at least, if not longer, the position of the high pressure across near the Azores in the northern Atlantic Ocean and the clockwise wind flow around it has been driving down dry air essentially from Europe out ahead of these tropical waves. Now, it's not uncommon for that to be the case, but this has been the pattern for weeks now. Europe is in the worst drought they've had in 500 years. And it's both due to the fact that it's really warm and that's evaporating a lot of the soil moisture, but also the fact that they just haven't seen much rain and it's been hot. So something's going on climate pattern-wise that is causing it to be dry in Europe, and it may also be influencing the tropical Atlantic as well, because you can see as that dry air heads south, it kind of cuts off these tropical waves as they move off Africa, and then they disintegrate or dissipate before they have a chance to really spin up and become something. You can see all the dry air and the dust. Dust has been a big problem, and it continues to be a problem, although not as big a problem as it was. You can see that dust moving out into the Atlantic, but then adding on top of that, it's not just dust. If storms can actually form, there's a lot of wind shear, and it's pretty far south. You can see that big dip in the jet stream, if you will. That is wind shear making its way all the way down to the Lesser Antilles. So if there was something this weekend in that area, it wouldn't have much of a chance. It wouldn't stand much of a chance. So we brought Rebecca in. We brought Wendy in. And as I go through these maps, I want to bring you into the conversation a little bit. But so why don't we do it now? I'll pose it to either one of you. Can you remember a season in recent history where, usually the models start spinning up storms, right? If they don't actually happen, you at least see the models say, okay, I think something's going to happen, and then it doesn't happen. Okay, I think something's going to happen, it doesn't happen. This year, you're not even seeing the models say that there could possibly be something, at least until now. Either one of you.
I'll let Wendy kick it off. Yeah. Welcome, Wendy.
Yeah.
Well, we're so far inland. I have very little experience with tracking the hurricanes. By the time the low pressure tracks up, if it lands anywhere off the coast of Florida or New Orleans, by the time it travels up the Mississippi, we're dealing with a low pressure system. It's like a depression. So we end up having more heavy rainfall and spin up tornadoes. So this is something that we do look at. And of course, we make the tracks, but not seeing the significant impact as what all of our coastal states usually see. We could see anywhere in a very strong system and a strong hurricane season, 4 inches of rainfall, scattered flooding. With Ida of last year, some areas received in Middle Tennessee 17 inches of flooding near Waverly. And then of course, when Ida came in, an additional 2 inches of rainfall. But for Memphis, we look at what the impact could be as far as tornadoes go. And so, yeah, we haven't had as busy a season with that, with the hurricane season.
And with the quieter seasons, sometimes what we call quieter seasons, especially along the coastline, are just when we get the weaker systems. Like, was it 2009? We got Tropical Storm Faye was the only main impacting system in Florida, and it dropped a ton of rain, just like what Wendy was talking about, because it stalled out across middle Florida and northeastern Florida. And so when you get those weaker systems, and especially once the systems move inland, that's when you get those torrential rainfall, and of course the flooding with that as well. And so sometimes that's what we call a quieter season, but I can't remember a season this quiet for this long, especially with no real signs of life. Like, we're just now barely starting to see signs of life in the Atlantic.
Yeah, and Wendy, I want to add to what you were saying, which is that we know from climate change that we've seen, and I spoke to an expert, we're going to bring him into the conversation pretty soon. Not right now, JB, but soon. This guy has studied the increased rainfall from climate change and warmer temperatures. And the standard is we usually have about 8% more moisture per 2 degrees Fahrenheit of warming. But when it comes to a hurricane, you can double that or more. So in places like Memphis, every landfalling tropical storm or hurricane, especially the strong ones that move your way, they have the potential of producing 15 to 20% more rain than they used to 50 years ago. So I just wanted to add that in because, I realize it's quiet right now, but when these storms start coming, and you're about to see why I think they are about to start coming, they produce more rain than they used to. So why don't we?
Right, and that is something that's needed. We're also experiencing a drought in Arkansas, so we need that, but not as much at one time.
Because of La Nina, which is interesting because La Nina usually produces these crazy hurricane seasons. We see 3 times the amount of hurricanes in La Nina than we see in El Nino traditionally, but this year has been the exception to the rule. So JB, can we bring that graphic up full? Because I want to show people the whole scope of this. And this is basically showing us where the rising and sinking motion is. So what's interesting is we head towards the beginning of September, the sinking motion is going to be in the Eastern Pacific. That's important because it means that the air has to rise in the adjacent basins. So basically that would be the Western Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. Also, lots of rising air across Africa and Indonesia, which is very conducive it's a very conducive pattern for an active Atlantic. So that's the overarching climate signal that's emerging as we head towards the end of August into the beginning of September. And so because of that, we think things will really start to activate. So let's take you on a tour of the GFS model, which is the American computer model, over the next 10 days and show you what we see. And first of all, in the Western Caribbean, and JB, I hate to do this to you, but can you go back to the full screen for a second?
I can.
I'm cutting off the part that... So that's the possible system that could move into Texas, and they need heavy rain. You can see, though, there's no closed isobar, so there's not a closed circulation on the American model, but it shows lots of moisture, and of course, any of those systems could easily spin up quickly. So sometime this weekend, there's a chance that could spin up before it heads into Texas and Mexico. So that's number one. Now let's take it out much further towards the end of August, and you'll notice that we start seeing some spinning take place, 2 areas in particular, one on the Gulf of Mexico. Now, do not take this at face value. This is simply not going to happen. What I'm trying to show you is that the computer model is showing signs of life, right? One system it's trying to spin up across the Gulf, and another one just to the west of the Cape Verde Islands. And if I could extend this, because I've seen out to 15 days, I would show you that it has 3 or more tropical systems after that time frame. So certainly things are becoming, or there are signs that things are going to become more active, especially from about the 25th of August onward. Usually it turns on around the 15th or 20th. So this year it's a week later, and that's because it's been so unfavorable in the Atlantic Ocean. And just to show you where we are right now, in 2020, we had already had 13 storms. That's why it feels so quiet right now. In 2021, we had already had 8 storms. This year, only 3 storms. And by the way, the accumulated cyclone energy which is a measure of all the storm's energy, so all the hurricanes, all the tropical systems, this year is 15% of normal. It is extraordinarily low. However, I will say that typically we see the fourth tropical system form on August 15th. So we're actually not very far behind in terms of name systems. It would normally be right now. We would see our fourth name system. But because of the last several years, relatively speaking, it seems very quiet. Oh, and by the way, the storms that we have had have been so short-lived and so weak that they haven't produced any energy. So we're just way behind, and we don't want to catch up. But I have a feeling that in the next week, Rebecca, start packing your bags. You'll be living here.
Yep.
No, I'm just kidding.
Don't say it. Don't
Bring
say
in the
it.
coffee maker.
Let's remind our audience it's August 17th, and we have not yet had a hurricane this season. Alex, Bonnie, and Colin that you're looking at here on the center of your screen, those have all been tropical storms. They have not escalated to hurricane status. Let's get to the next level of our program if we can for a second. Let's start to get some questions and comments going in here. Use a hashtag. Ask a question. That's how simple this is. Steal Erica from the WMBB Facebook page. That's in Panama City on the Florida Panhandle. Hashtag HeyJB saying we need storms.
Why do you need storms?
Where are they?
Do we?
Do they need a little bit of precipitation up there on the northern Gulf Coast?
They're not terribly dry. I mean, they're right in the middle of rainy season. I mean, maybe they own a roofing company.
Well, they had heavy rain yesterday.
Yeah.
That waterspout.
That waterspout video was unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, it started to go viral a little bit too. Let's get to this one from from Wavy. This is Wavy's Facebook page. Danielle Ray Bartlett, hashtag HJB. When you guys say tropical waves, are you talking about water or airflow? It's an interesting question.
It is. Rebecca, why don't you feel that?
And so when we say tropical waves, that's basically a storm that we're watching. It's an area of disturbed weather. It's not spinning enough for us to call it a tropical depression, but it's a storm in the air. It's not a wave in the water like you might think of a wave at the beach. And so when we're saying we're tracking a tropical wave, we're tracking an area of disturbed weather, usually giant thunderstorm complexes, for the potential that it may start to rotate or further develop into a tropical system that may get a name or number. But wave is just the designation of it's too early to call it anything, but we're watching it.
Let's again remind our audience here that we're live, of course, from your hurricane headquarters to field your questions. And as we understand it, Wendy, we've got a sizable audience from your station's Facebook page. Again, WREG joining us from Memphis, Tennessee. So if anybody wants to ask a question to meteorologist Wendy Nations, our featured meteorologist joining us there in the top right-hand portion of your screen, you can use hashtag HeyWendy, and of course we will pose that question to Wendy or any of the hashtags that you see on your screen. But a lot of the comments that I have seen so far have been either shush or the shush emoji. Don't jinx us.
Yeah.
Is it similar up there for you, Wendy? Like, hey, the tropics are quiet. Let's keep it that way.
You know, our secondary severe weather season is coming into November. So, you know, when we start talking about hurricane season, you know, that also fuels a lot of the energy that we would talk about, the spin up tornadoes. So just when things start cooking in the Gulf is when we're also looking at the different flow of the fronts moving out of the north and then down to the south. And we're still percolating here, you know, across the southeast. So we start talking about, you know, every time October, November comes around, you know, that's when we really start talking about tracking severe weather and destructive tornadic season. So it kind of goes hand in hand.
You know, I find it so interesting, and this is slightly off the beaten path here, but you're essentially Tornado Alley, and I say it that way, but it's kind of shifted, and it shifted over you. You know, it used to be a propensity for the most tornadoes in Oklahoma and Texas. That still is the case. But the greatest frequency increase has happened right where you are, which you are obviously aware of. And by the way, you know, when the tornadoes get to you, it's usually nighttime. So it poses a very, tough situation and a dangerous situation. Then also the Gulf of Mexico has warmed up at least a couple of degrees, adding more fuel to the fire, right? So that moisture is heading your way. So everything seems to be coming together for an increase in severe weather across your area.
That's right. So I would rather it be quiet the entire season, but yes, that's a reason why I stay up to date with what's going on in the tropics, because yes, it could definitely affect us as well, even though we're so far inland.
We have this question from Ashley Rogers-Riker from WFLA's Facebook page, hashtag HeyJB. I was here for all three bad storms in 2004. And wasn't it quiet that year as well? And of course, I think that the storm that people are going to remember from that year is Charlie. And I'm looking here at the page for, so Charlie developed, and I'm looking here in midway through August, and that was another, so all you got to do, everybody, it's not all that difficult. You're just kind of following the alphabet, right? If you are at Hurricane Charlie midway through August, that means that you've only had two named storms before that.
I mean, Andrew was the 22nd of August when it hit Miami in 1992. So again, the point being that it can be quiet for a while and it could just all of a sudden turn on. You get storm after storm, 2 or 3 at a time that you're tracking. We hope that's not the case, but again, there are climate signs that it is going to at least pick up. Things are going to pick up. Hey, JB, so we have a soundbite from a scientist that I interviewed, and this is such a surprising, I think, finding for people who follow or don't follow climate change, right? I think the general thought is, well, if it's warmer, there are going to be more hurricanes, right? That's what most people would think, but you may not be right. So I'm going to introduce to you Dr. Michael Werner. He is from Berkeley National Laboratories. He's one of the top climate scientists in the United States and in the world. And this is what his research found about the increase or decrease in tropical systems globally.
So when you run these models, which you find is in a cooler climate, you actually do get more tropical cyclones. Is that right?
Yeah. As odd as that might sound. It is important, though, to remember that this doesn't mean that climate change decreases the dangers of hurricanes, because even though there are fewer hurricanes, the most intense ones are more intense in a warmer world. But this decline is, at least according to the models, and I really think this is true, is only in the weak storms, in the named tropical storms. And the category 1s. By the time you get up to category 2, there isn't much change. And by the time you get to 4 and 5, there's an increase.
So the decrease in number of tropical systems is robust. It's about 15% globally and about 28% in the Atlantic Ocean because of a warmer climate. Crazy to think about that. But what he also said was most of the decrease is happening with depressions, tropical storms, and category 1 hurricanes. Once you get to cat 3s and above, there's an increase in number, and those are the storms that cause the most damage. We can get into the reasons why, but I'm not sure folks are that interested in exactly what the reason is there. But nevertheless, I think it's a surprising finding. Don't you guys find it somewhat surprising? Counterintuitive, maybe?
Absolutely. You heard the theory, of course, it's oversimplified that the warmer temperatures possibly would cause a higher shear and keep the Atlantic a little bit quieter. So that's an oversimplified version of it. So I think that this kind of follows along with that. But what it balances out with for me is the human factor and the fact that our satellites have gotten so much better. We are naming and numbering systems that we would have not necessarily been on our radar, so to speak, before the satellite upgrades. And so we're seeing an uptick in the number of named and numbered systems from the National Hurricane Center. Like, I'm not sure Colin would have been named 10 or 15 years ago.
Probably not.
Based on the satellite. But now I have such better satellites, we can name and number systems that are out over the Atlantic that only last a day or two. And so it'll be interesting to see how that balances out with the warming climate.
Right. Let's get to some other questions before we wrap up this edition of Tracking the Tropics. All these screens you just saw, by the way, we're monitoring your questions and comments. Use any of the hashtags, and we can, of course, answer your questions live. Veronica asking this question from Wavy's Facebook page, #HeyJB, does a quiet hurricane season, and we're not there yet. We're not through hurricane season yet, so let's remind our audience of that. But does it mean an uptake in winter storms?
So I am going to defer to the two ladies because I don't know the answer to that question. No, there is really no answer to that question, but yeah.
No. I wouldn't know how to answer that for sure as all. I mean,
which is why I'm throwing you under the bus.
We get this every year, is this going to be the La Nina? Is it going to be a stronger winter season for us? And here we go. We don't get a lot of snowfall, but we get ice. And last year was a horrific, ice season for us as far as power outages go with that. And so I'm hoping that there is no correlation, but I'm interested to hear the answer as well.
How about this question coming in? I like this one from Ashley from WFLA's Facebook page. Yes, that September, referencing 2004, was brutal, but historically, most of our storms in Florida seem to hit in September anyways. And I'm chuckling because they spelt out #JB, which is, I don't know if I've ever seen that. They actually spelled that out. But is this true? Is September the month for when we really should expect most of the activity in Florida?
Well, September is, first of all, the peak of hurricane season. So we would expect the most activity in Florida during the peak of hurricane season. September 10th is the peak. So I think just by default, there are a lot more storms in September, so they're going to hit Florida more often. What I'm worried about is October for Tampa, for Tampa, for the west coast of Florida. For the east coast of Florida, I would say end of August, very beginning of September. For the west coast of Florida, it's end of September into October because, well, the storms start turning at that point. The jet stream starts to lower itself from Canada, and all of a sudden now storms that start to move north in the Gulf, the westerly winds, the jet stream, which is common during the winter but not during the summer, starts to push these systems towards the west coast of Florida. So if we're going to get hit by a direct hit by something that's really going to have a huge impact on the Tampa Bay area, Fort Myers, north from there, it's generally going to be more often in September and into the first half of October.
Let's get to this last question. Then I have a question for everybody, but this is the last question we're going to take from our audience. Bobby from the WFLA Facebook page saying #KJB, are we going to get Tropical Storm Danielle? I think odds are, if you were looking at the odds of this, chances are we are going to get Tropical Storm Danielle eventually. But the system that is currently by the Yucatan, what do we say as far as, again, it's 10% over the next 2 days, 30% over 5, right?
I think it's really unlikely that this ends up getting named. It just looks like it's too close. It would have to get out over the Gulf a little bit more than I think it's going to. I do think by the end of August, we're looking at Tropical Storm Danielle at some point.
Well, there was the system a couple days ago across Texas, which actually, it did form what I would have considered to be into a tropical depression. And it wasn't named because by the time it finally got its act together, it had moved over land. That might be a similar scenario with this, where it's able to, at the last minute, get its circulation together and organization enough. Let me just shut my alarm off here. I'm being reminded that I have other responsibilities. We all do, right? So this next system could do a similar thing where it gets to the coast of Texas, then it forms. Question is it's really up to them at the National Hurricane Center. Was it still over the water, or was it just 10 miles inland? So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Before we wrap up this edition of Tracking the Tropics, I have a question for our 3 meteorologists, again, being joined by Chief Meteorologist Jeff Biradelli, Meteorologist Rebecca Barry, and joining us from Memphis, Tennessee, Wendy Nations from our Next Star sister station, WREG. So here's my question. And I'm a baseball fan, so this is my analogy for this. When a pitcher is throwing a perfect game or a no-hitter, and it gets to a certain part of the game, you don't talk about it. It's considered baseball tradition to not mention that they're throwing a perfect game or throwing a no-hitter because you would jinx it. Right. The idea of jinxing. So I'm going to ask every one of our meteorologists here on the panel, do you believe that right now things are relatively nice with the tropics, relatively quiet out there? Do you believe in jinxing it, that you're talking too much about it and then all of a sudden, or do you, I think Jeff is probably more on the science side versus the superstition side, but how do you guys feel about it?
Well, I would hate to think that this program is now going to cause an imminent hurricane. I mean, you might have killed lots of people just now, JB, by Tracking the Tropics. No, of course, we don't believe in that.
Yeah, I'm a nerd. We're not jocks like baseball guys. We're going to talk about everything, every possibility. We're going to look at every swirl out there and think about it and talk about it. And no jinx here.
Wendy, science over superstition as well?
I would always go for science. The nerd in me will always going for science.
Well, guys, if there is tropical activity in the weeks ahead, you can blame the guy in the top left-hand corner of your screen because they clearly believe in science. I'm a tad bit superstitious. But of course, we're always going to stick to the science here on Tracking the Tropics. We, of course, are live every Wednesday, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central. We also have additional episodes when storms form. Whatever website, app, or social media platform that you're watching on right now, we do interactive live Q&As and bring you the latest as it's happening in the tropics. So as we expect things to pick up a little bit as we approach the peak of hurricane season in September, we're here to let you know the very latest with, of course, some of the best meteorologists in the country. Grateful to have Wendy Nations. Wendy, the floor is yours. Any last thoughts before we let you go?
Thanks for having me. You guys be safe down there, and we'll be watching all of you. And hoping the best for you as
Thank-
this system begins to bubble up.
Thanks a lot, Wendy. Follow Wendy Nations, everybody, on social media. WREG meteorologist in Memphis, Tennessee. Again, for Rebecca, Wendy, Jeff, I'm JB. We'll see you next time, folks, on Tracking the Tropics.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.